All right, let's dive right into this explainer. We're going to unpack the hidden, ethical, and, frankly, massive financial costs of the metals sitting inside your modern technology. We rely on these resources every single day, right? But the origin stories of these minerals are often incredibly complex. So, mining in volatile regions, we know it carries severe risks. We're talking everything from human rights abuses to massive financial losses. But how do we actually track and measure these red zone risks objectively? It can't just be based on gut feelings or the latest news headlines. We need cold, hard data. To get that data, we're going to follow a 4-part roadmap. First, the transparency standard. Second, operating in conflict zones. Third, protecting Indigenous rights. And finally, security and due diligence. Okay, let's start with Section 1, the transparency standard. This framework right here, the SASB standards, which is actually now under the stewardship of the IFRS Foundation, is basically the ultimate benchmark for sustainability reporting. And what's cool is it doesn't just ask companies for vague PR promises about being good corporate citizens. No, it requires them to disclose highly specific, standardized risks about exactly where and how they extract resources. It literally bridges that gap between ethical concerns and bottom-line financial reality. Now, we hear the term conflict zone on the news all the time, right? But think about it. How does an accountant or a Wall Street investor strictly define that to actually measure corporate exposure? Which brings us to Section 2, operating in conflict zones. So looking at the specific metric here, the absolutely crucial number you need to know is 25. An active conflict is strictly defined as having at least 25 battle-related deaths per calendar year between two opposing parties, what they call a dyad. If a mine is located in the same country as that active conflict, or even just adjacent to it, the company is completely mandated to report it. And it gets deeper. They can't just say, yeah, we have operations there. Companies actually have to disclose the exact percentage of both their proved reserves, meaning the ones that are well established, measured, and deeply sampled, and their probable reserves located in these danger zones. So why does this matter to us? Well, because operating there risks severe operational delays, totally destroyed infrastructure, and massive asset write-downs. We're literally talking about billions of dollars in sunk costs that could just evaporate overnight. Now, beyond armed conflict zones, we really have to look at another highly sensitive area of exposure that carries enormous operational risk: the rights of vulnerable communities. Basically, what happens when mining expansion directly intersects with ancestral lands? Let's move into Section 3, protecting Indigenous rights. For this metric, there is absolutely zero room for ambiguity. The standard grounds its definition in strict United Nations and International Labor Organization characteristics. So, companies must accurately identify distinct, historically continuous communities with non-dominant social structures. And here's the kicker. If their mining reserves fall within a 5-kilometer radius of these recognized boundaries, it goes straight on the report. And this brings up a huge so what factor for operations. Companies have to discuss their use of FPIC, that's free, prior, and informed consent. This is absolutely essential. Ignoring Indigenous rights isn't just a moral failing. From a business standpoint, it can lead to massive blockades, protests, riots, and the immediate total legal suspension of their mining permits. So, recognizing a risk is one thing, right? But how do corporations actually prove to their investors and to the public that they aren't somehow complicit in human rights violations when operating in these incredibly complex environments? That leads us to our final part, Section 4, security and due diligence. When operating in these conflict areas, companies are expected to detail their approach using the OECD's 5-step framework for responsible supply chains. They have to show they're building strong management systems, actively identifying those risks, actually implementing strategies to mitigate them, carrying out independent third-party audits, and publicly reporting on all of this every single year. It's an entire system designed to ensure they aren't inadvertently fueling armed conflicts. On top of that, they are required to report on how they uphold the International Labor Organization's fundamental principles. This is a big deal because it means verifying that their local operations, and crucially, any private or government security forces they hire, actually respect the freedom of association. They have to prove these forces are completely free from forced labor, child labor, and discrimination. Ultimately, companies have to disclose if they've established formal community agreements and project grievance mechanisms. This essentially proves they actually have legitimate systems in place locally to hear, process, and address community concerns before, and this is key, before they escalate into full-blown human rights disasters or trigger prolonged operational shutdowns. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a pretty provocative thought, especially when you think about the very device you're using to watch this right now. Are your investments unknowingly funding conflict? Without these strict quantitative sustainability metrics forcing real corporate transparency, how would we ever know the true human cost of the metals we rely on every single day?